I'm hoping that you had fun playing with those magnets. I'm playing with one right now here. They're so fun to play with. I can tell you, I'm an adult, and this does not get old to me. Magnets are so weird. What is it that's so unusual about them? Well, I think the biggest thing is that it's because they can pull on things. They're a force, but without touching on anything. That's what's weird. In fact, a magnet's force, as you saw, can go right through a solid object like my hand here. Now think about that. Normally, in almost every other example in your life, if there's a pushing or pulling on something, it's because one object is touching the other object. They're in contact with one another. But magnets, they're weird. They don't need to touch something to pull on it. This is the property, this is the characteristic of magnets, which is their most famous. Magnets can pull on certain things without touching them directly. And it's actually this fact about magnets which led to their discovery in the first place. Have you ever thought about that? Where do magnets come from? How did we find out about them? The ones you have were made in a factory. But the very first magnets were actually found in nature. Nobody knows exactly when the first magnets were discovered, but let me tell you a good story about them, passed on to us from the ancient Greeks, who lived here in Europe about 2,000 years ago. Now, in order to make sense of this story, you have to know that the ancient Greeks, well, they wore sandals a lot, and those sandals used nails to keep the top part of the shoe attached to the bottom. You can see some of those nails right here. And the story goes that an ancient Greek farmer went out into the hilly countryside to look for his sheep. But at one spot where there was this patch of bare rock, his shoes kept coming apart. He'd take 2 steps, and the nails would fall out of his shoes. So he'd fix them, and he'd take another step, and the nails would fall out again. This had him really scratching his head. He's thinking, what is going on here? He sat down beside the rocky area, and he tried to figure out what was happening, and that's when he noticed that the rocks themselves were pulling the nails out of his shoes. The name of this place was a region of ancient Greece called Magnesia, and the word used to describe something that came from Magnesia was magnetes. And so these strange nail-pulling rocks, this is a real picture of one. You can see it's pulling on some paper clips. These rocks came to be called magnetes rocks, or for short, magnets. That's the story of how the first magnets were discovered, and that's how they got their name. Now, this story brings up another really important characteristic of magnets, which is that they don't pull on just anything. They only pull on metal. And it's not all kinds of metal either. They only pull on one kind of metal that you're familiar with. There are lots of different kinds of metals. There's copper, there's gold, there's silver, but magnets only pull on this kind. It's called iron. And they pull on steel as well, but that's because steel is a metal that is mostly made of iron. So of all these common metals, only iron and steel are magnetic. Magnets are only able to pull on iron or steel objects. The nails in that shepherd's shoes from the story, they were made of iron. And paper clips, they're made of iron too, which is why we included them for your experiments. Now, through those experiments, hopefully you discovered some of the other secrets of magnets too. Like this, let me show you something. You know that this paper clip, it's not a magnet. It can be pulled on by a magnet, but it's not a magnet itself. But hopefully you saw when it touches a magnet, now the paper clip acts like a magnet too. And so now the paper clip itself can pull on or attract other paper clips. You can just keep adding them like this. So that's another secret of magnets. When a piece of iron touches a magnet, the iron becomes a magnet itself. We have a word for this. We say that the iron has become magnetized. But here's something you might not have thought to experiment with. Does the iron stay that way once it touches a magnet? Like if we were to pull these magnets here away from the paper clips now, will the paper clips stay magnets? Will they stay magnetized?